we do find out a lot of interesting things by reading Republic. Maybe things that we weren't prepared to find out, or we didn't anticipate finding out. I mean, one of the things that you do find out, I think, is the status of the philosopher in fifth century Greece was not exactly elevated. They were objects of suspicion and derision. So Socrates, or Plato through Socrates in the Republic, spends a lot of time, as we saw in Book Five, defending the philosopher, but not defending everybody who calls themselves philosophers. I mean, there are a lot of people, myself. Well, I don't call myself a philosopher, so I'm okay. But there are a lot of people who, I guess, would like to be called philosophers who really weren't true philosophers in Plato's mind. And so, in defending the philosopher, as we saw, he has to define who the philosopher is. Who is the philosopher? And after all, what is going on here in this book? Books 5 and 6 are really incredibly interesting because they're ultimately a defense of the city that they've built, where it's been revealed that the rulers are philosophers. But you really have to ask yourself, and Plato certainly thought that he had to answer the question: why would a philosopher make a good ruler? And that, of course, is a question. Why would philosophy make a good way of life? Would be a parallel question. So much in this book, we have to remember that the political and the personal sort of go side by side. That Socrates' brilliant method for exploring questions of how we should be as individuals is done largely through exploring what our political communities should be, and that they should reflect each other, which is a very old idea, right? But why is it that philosophers should rule, and why is it that I should be a philosopher? Seem to be very closely related questions. And in the discussion in books 5 and 6, and most dramatically at the end of book 6 with this image of the divided line, I think we get what I would guess to be Plato's ultimate answer to both of those things. One of the awkward expressions that we're faced with trying to make sense of in books 5 and 6, I think it's introduced in book 5, but used, sprinkled throughout the discussion, is this notion of what is. Again, I think it's in book 5 that Socrates makes distinctions between what is not, and what both is and is not, which seemed to be a very strange thing to say. What is not, I suppose by that Plato meant what is false, what is an illusion. What is that which truly exists. And that which both is and is not would be things that sort of exist, I suppose, somewhere halfway between what is not and what is, what both is and is not. But what is he talking about? I think that this is one of the big obstacles to reading a Republic is we get to this, what truly is a metaphysical part of the book. We go so quickly from an ethical discussion to a political discussion about education and class structure and political power, to a very abstract discussion about really the nature of reality, which would be metaphysics. That's what at least what I would call metaphysics, trying to say things about the basic structure of reality, about what is real. And Plato had very definite ideas about that. For him, what is real is what is. And what is not real at all. And what both is and is not is kind of sort of real. But that's all, it sounds almost silly. It does sound not almost silly, it sounds silly. But I think a key is concentrating first on what he means by what is. And I like thinking about it the following way. I mean, What is would for Plato would be something that never changes. First of all, something that is changeless. So if we think of any physical object that were any of the, cell phone, a hand, a computer, a pair of glasses, if we think of any physical object, anything in nature with a material sort of manner of being, you might say, we can't say that it's changeless. For instance, take something that existed at the time of Socrates, the physical structure of the Parthenon, the great Greek temple in Athens. Surely Socrates, I think it was a fairly new building for Socrates, but surely he was there. Surely he visited it as part of his life as an Athenian. Well, that building is still with us, but boy, it's changed in 2,500 years or so. It has definitely gone through a lot of changes. It's still here. One expects that someday it won't be here anymore, but it's still here. But it's gone through changes. That is, it's the same building, I guess. That raises questions too, but I would say it's the same building, but it's different. It's gone through a mutation of some sort. It's worn. It's old. But then think of something else that Socrates must have done. Say the mathematics that he knew. Say that his grasp of the number one, or his grasp of the Pythagorean theorem, the great, emblematic theorem about the relationship between the sides of a right triangle. Say that he grasped the Pythagorean theorem, and that he grasped the concept of one, and that you and we can grasp those things too. And what would characterize that grasping is that whatever it is we grasp, first of all, doesn't have a physical nature. It's not something in nature in the sense that the cell phone, my hand, my glasses are not physical objects. That is, it's what Socrates calls the intelligible realm, and that's one side of that line that he draws at the end of Book 6. What's more, one would imagine that if indeed Socrates grasped the concept of the number one, or he grasped the relation in the Pythagorean theorem between the three lines of a right triangle, that he grasped the very same thing that we do when we think of it, when we understand it, you might say. So these conceptual things, as opposed to material things, when we grasp them, we grasp something that in Plato's mind is eternal and unchanging, and whose validity and truth is unchanging as well. Of course, Plato is not primarily interested in mathematics, but it's clear that he thought that mathematics was the proper training to do philosophy. Well, why? Well, because grasping the ultimate realities of what he calls the forms, the beautiful in itself, the just in itself, other purely conceptual things, virtue in itself, and a host of other in itself. The grasping those things would be grasping things that to his mind are also unchanging and eternal. That is, they are what truly are. So the philosopher, who is the philosopher? The philosopher is the person who grasps what truly exists, whereas the rest of us, maybe to some degree or another, are grasping what both is and is not, which would be things that change. Is it the same Parthenon it was in Socrates' time? Yes and no. It's different. It's not the same. But then again, it's sort of, it both is and is not the Parthenon of Socrates' time, the same thing, because it's undergoing changes just like every other physical object. So why does the philosopher deserve to rule? Because he's the one who grasps true reality. You might say that the question then, on the personal level, is why should I be a philosopher, and why should I let the philosophical part of myself rule over the rest of me? Because that's the part that grasps what truly is.